I want to bring in Peter Knights now for more on these conservation efforts. He's the CEO of WildAid, a group focusing on preventing illegal animal trade and poaching. And Peter, thanks so much for joining us there from California. China, as Lo, you pointed out, biggest ivory market in the world. What does a ban like this mean for poachers?
Well, ever since President Xi announced a ban last year, the price of ivory has dropped dramatically. So now it's less than 50% of what it was at the height. And that means there's less money for poachers, less money for smugglers. And it's really given the African elephant a new lease of life and a new chance for survival.
Peter, this, as you say, making conservation efforts in Africa better. But what are some of the problems, the hurdles that you still have to overcome?
Well, obviously, in Africa, financing the anti-poaching efforts is an ongoing challenge. And obviously, elephants are assets as well as just animals. They bring in a lot of tourism revenue. But more recently, the Chinese government has been supporting things like purchase of vehicles for anti-poaching teams. And they need that support on an ongoing basis.
You know, we heard in Lo Yu's report about the companies themselves being involved and one producing a documentary to educate the general public. That still is key, isn't it?
Education is very important, both in China, so that people understand the consequences of buying products like ivory and rhino horn, and also in Africa, because many people don't quite appreciate what an asset it is and how important it is for the economy. And so we need political will to crack down on corruption and problems in Africa that are enabling things like ivory trade. So at both ends, we need education.
So talk to me about successes, failures from the Chinese wildlife conservation efforts that are going on in Africa.
Well, I think the President Xi's ivory ban in China has been a huge success. Seizures of ivory going to China last year were down by 80%. The poaching of elephants in Kenya went from 350 elephants down to 90 last year. So I think that's been a tremendous success. And as you mentioned in your piece, individuals and the government are both getting involved in supporting on-the-ground efforts as well, which I think is tremendous for China's image in Africa, as well, of course, for the animals.
And Peter, before we let you go, what are some of the struggles you still confront every day? Because I know this is obviously an uphill battle in many respects.
It is, and we see some sort of shifting of trade, for example. So now Vietnam has emerged as a transit market for things like ivory, where the laws are weaker there and there's less political will. So it's a bit of a whack-a-mole, sometimes cracking down on the weakest points. And finance is always a challenge for conservation. But we predicted many years ago that China would go from being one of the biggest problems in terms of a source of demand into one of the biggest financial supporters of conservation in Africa. And that's what we're seeing now.
Peter Knights joining us from San Francisco. Thanks so much.